All right. Super excited to have our guest, Kristy Christensen, on the Jobseekers podcast today. And Kristy, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I actually have a sister named Kristy Christensen as well. This Kristy and I aren't related, but my sister spells her name with an IE instead of a Y, how you spell
Okay,
your name. So
I love it.
there you go. Super excited to have you on. So for those of you that know Kristy is a people business partner for Thumbtack and is super successful there. And previous to that, she'd worked at PayPal and eBay and a variety of other places. She's got such a great wealth of knowledge. And so as a people business partner, being able to help job seekers think through the best ways to be able to achieve work is what we're going to cover today. So Kristy, maybe it would be cool to hear a little bit about your perspective as a people business partner to how you think about and work with job seekers in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my role, really heavy involvement in the interview panel. And so as I'm helping job seekers, I'm also in a position that I can really help managers understand how to interview. What are the questions that you should be looking for? Diving deeper and being okay to ask those hard questions, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're finding the best fit for the manager and their team, but also is this the best fit for the job seeker and what they're looking for in their next journey? And a lot of managers go through just like the basic questions, or they think that they should ask, but they're not really sure how to dive deep. Other managers dive deep, and it's awesome because they can really understand the talent and the skill set that that individual is able to bring to their team. And what I love about it is it impacts the organization, impacts the company, especially as we look at the culture fit.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's super important. Hiring managers being able to go in and be super prepared and asking the right questions and being able to probe deeper is critical. So I think your experience and knowledge for our job seekers will be critical because you're kind of this coach that's helping hiring managers think through how to do that effectively. So ultimately, you kind of have the answers to the test for job seekers that are trying to get the job. So I think today it'll be really interesting as we pick your brain to see what will help these job seekers the most.
Yeah.
And you've been at Thumbtack for a little while now.
Yeah.
What do you love the most about Thumbtack that keeps you there and keeps you excited?
Yeah. So one thing that I love about Thumbtack is the people. And with the people comes the culture. And that's how it kind of sets the environment and the basis of a company that you really work for. The culture here is fantastic, very inclusive, very thoughtful and mindful of the employees. When I started at Thumbtack, I told my husband, I have rarely worked for a company that cares so much about their employees. And they have so many organizations and programs put into place for the employees that isn't really relative to the actual work that they do. So ERG groups, a lot of career conversations, courageous conversations where we talk about mental wellness. And we introduce some of our TAC vets or our VAMOS ERG groups or Access, Noble Tax. And it's really bringing in this diversity of belonging for employees within those ERGs that sets the tone of like accepting and appreciating what everyone has to offer when they bring their best self to work.
I love that. And when you say ERG, you're talking about employer resource groups, correct?
Yes.
Just for
Yep.
those that may not know, if you work at a larger company, a lot of people are very familiar with that. And then maybe if you work at a smaller company, they don't have these really cool ERG groups to become a part of and allow you to bring kind of your full self to work and get involved in things that you're interested in that makes work a lot more fun to be a part of. So that's cool that there's so many different groups and exciting culture that's there, and I'm sure you're out there thriving. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right, well let's dive into candidates for just a minute and people that are seeking jobs, and maybe we start kind of at the very beginning when people, a lot of people have been laid off. or people are just, maybe they're looking for their first job. There can be so many different scenarios, or maybe you're even, you've been in your job for a while and you're trying to get another job. But, as job seekers are thinking about their first steps in seeking a job, what are some of the things that you've seen or that you found that it's really helpful for job seekers to be thinking about at the very beginning of the job search process?
For sure. I think the most important for them to consider and really just do a self-evaluation. What are they wanting in their
Mm,
next step in their career or in the environment that they want to work in? So, I really love when individuals understand and they know career development and where they want to go. And really being able to assess that for themselves gives them that clear direction of what they're going to look for out in the marketplace for open positions. Understanding, so here at Thumbtack, we really place a lot of one of our values, which is own it, into career development. So owning your journey, and that really starts with looking for other positions that might be available, and do they resonate with you? And then really taking into consideration, what do they want from the next company that they will apply for? Looking at the values, do they resonate with that employee, and do they identify that some of those values they exhibit today? Can they be a culture fit for the organization, and will they enjoy showing up to work every day because the environment speaks to the same output that they would expect from themselves? And then really, what is the working model that they prefer? So do they want to be on location? Do they want hybrid work? Do they want remote work? This is a new thing within the last 2 to 3 years that people have to start deciding what fits their personality and their working style, and really being honest with yourself for those areas of opportunity. I had a situation with an individual who they identified like, I can't be a remote worker. It's
mm,
really hard for me to be alone in
yeah.
front of a computer all day long. So knowing that, or being okay to explore that, that is totally fine. And I love that at our company we do allow for some flexibility. We turned some of our offices into libraries, so it's not expected that you go into a library, but it is there and available in some communities if you feel like you want to get out of the house and go into a workplace, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think having that flexibility is great, but to your point, some people need that in-office experience. They need to be able to connect with human beings and see people face to face. But I love that you've just provided this outline for people to really take that assessment and understand themselves, what's going to be right for them, what do they need. I think a lot of times people skip that step. They
Yeah.
just jump right to like, I'm going to get my resume out to a million different places and here we go, without taking that step back to think about, well, hang on a second. What am I going to be really good at? What should I focus on? How do I want to show up? And if you do that, you're going to be in a much better place, because if you don't and you just get whatever job, you're going to end up probably not being happy in that job, a couple of months in, and have to start this whole thing over again. So it's really
Exactly.
just being intentional with kind of what you want to do and how you want to do it and taking that step ahead. So I love that. So thanks for providing kind of that checklist of things to think about. Are there other ways? You provided some really great options. What about if somebody just doesn't even know kind of where to start for that assessment? Who would you recommend that they talk to help them kind of do this? If they can't do the self-assessment on their own, are there people that they could maybe talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any mentor that you can bring into your life, and that could be a parent, it could be a neighbor that you've respected, it could be a friend, a previous colleague, it could also be your manager. And I know sometimes we haven't really opened the door to having good relationships and honest conversations with your manager. For a business partner, I encourage managers to open up that environment to have that interaction with their employee. Ultimately, to lay the foundation of you should support your employees' growth, whether it's internally or externally. So explore that conversation with them. it can even answer questions to, what do you enjoy about your current job? What about the working environment? What would you want differently? As a manager, you can help identify where we can provide opportunities internally, or identifying, hey, as an employee, and I'm helping you as a job seeker or potential, here's some things that really worked for me. And here's what I had to go through as I was developing my career journey to think through some of these things. Like you said, some employees or some job seekers might not even know that you can think about those questions as you're assessing for yourself what you want and what you need. And as you were talking about that, in my mind, the first thing that kind of came up was, yeah, some job seekers are so robotic in putting their resume out there, waiting for callbacks, going through the interview process, trying to say the right thing or give the right examples. But to me, it's like, but are they kind of numb? Do
Yeah.
they really know what they're passionate about? And that's the biggest thing of talk to people. This is all about networking. Networking isn't just, hey, what job do you have open? It's really, what do you like about your job? What do you like about your
Yes.
career journey? What works for you? Just start asking questions. Questions are always good.
I like that you said that. Like sometimes you can just become numb in the job seeking process. And when you do, you end up you show up numb to people that are assessing you, right? And they're like, gosh, this person just doesn't have any passion. They're not excited. They don't seem engaged. So I love that, what you said. And then the other thing that I thought that you said was interesting is employers having, this really great relationship, or leaders having great relationships with their employees to be able to have these career conversations. I think, was it Richard Branson that had somebody come to him and said, gosh, what if we do all this training for our employees and they end up leaving us and going somewhere else? And he's like, well, what if we don't train our employees and they end up staying? Like figuring out how to create these relationships of trust between leaders and their employees is super important. And whether it's they can grow within the company or they can grow outside the company, there's going to be a lot more goodwill in that and more productivity for the company with mindsets like that. I remember sitting down with a leader that I had at Pluralsight. Her name is Anita Grantham. And she said, Jeremy, like, what do you want to do? What's going to be next for you? And I actually said, what I really want to do eventually is start my own company and do X, Y, and Z. And she was really open to that and really, well, here's some things you should think about, and here's some people that you should connect with, and was willing to engage in that conversation. And that made me want to trust her and follow her, even more, because she was willing to do that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that's meaningful for hiring managers and leaders, and for their employees, and figuring out how to create that trust.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's say you've kind of, started the assessment process, and now you're, putting applications out strategically. Hopefully people are putting out strategically. They're not just sending resumes out to a million places. That's not going to work. But let's say that you do get an interview. What would you recommend that these job seekers do as they're, receiving that first interview? What are the tips and tricks that you would recommend, maybe specifically that you've done in your career, or that you see that's really successful at Thumbtack as well?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing to start off and remember is, yes, the details in your resume have gotten you to this stage, and that's awesome. And it was able to speak for itself to get an interview. But now is the time to really highlight the value that you can provide relative to the role. So what are your interests? What are your passions? What are your growth opportunities that you want to see? And how proactive were you in your current role to highlight some of those things? And one thing that I love to see, so I do this for myself, I love it when I'm interacting with some candidates, is they've prepared a list of examples that they can share with each member of the interview panel, and they're so different. And I love that, because as a member of the interview panel, what I find is that it continues to highlight that individual during our calibration discussions and deliberations. So when we're speaking about, hey, here's the interview that I had with this individual, they shared this example. If other individuals are like, oh yeah, they shared that too. Oh, they shared that too. To me, that kind of limits our ability to really get to know and understand this individual. Like, do they not have anything else that they were able to highlight? Versus a candidate that shares an experience, and I share that with the interview panel, and then somebody else shares another one. Instantly, I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more. Like, it creates and sparks this
I
interest
love
in a
that.
job seeker to be
Yeah.
like, okay, he didn't share that, but that, I love that example. And then we keep talking about it, and it just exposes their availability to do so much more than just that one example that highlighted maybe a bullet in the job description. So for any job seeker, I would say really sit down with that job description that you applied and give multiple examples to each bulleted item of what is expected in the role, what does success look like in that role that you can speak to, and then be very fluid with those examples that you share, because it really gives us more insight and excitement in the candidate who does that.
I love that. And, if they don't do that, you see that pretty frequently on interview panels, and you're pulling back up and discussing the candidate. I think it's really interesting, when somebody has a variety of different experiences that they've had versus the same experience. That's gold. I actually haven't had anybody on the podcast that has mentioned that, because a lot of times you stick to your one or two really good examples that you're really good at, but can you go deeper, and can you be more, versus diluting everything to just these one or two examples. So Kristy, I love that. That's really great.
Absolutely.
Great
Thank you.
advice.
Yeah. I think sometimes we get stuck into feeling like we have to have an elevator pitch
Yeah.
and stick to that. But really the value in sharing some of those examples really helps highlight them, highlight us. I was in an interview, and I love when they ask questions at the end. And it was like, anything else that you have questions on or that I can highlight for you. And it was like, oh, well, I would have loved to hear, like, I'm looking for this. And they're like, oh yeah, I have an example. And it's like, oh, but I shouldn't have to pull that out of you. Or like, gosh, I wish I would have heard that
Earlier.
earlier in our discussion so we can expand on it. So I would remember that if you're going into interviews, to be confident in yourself and be willing to talk. It can be uncomfortable for people who don't like to talk about themselves, but that's what we want to hear. And it is the right platform and environment to do that.
Okay. And at Thumbtack, I'm sure you have developed a very particular recruiting process and exactly kind of how things work. Is there anything that you'd highlight for candidates if they're interviewing with Thumbtack that they should be thinking about, whether it's the pre-application process, the application, the interview, post-interview, any of it, anywhere along that journey? Are there any particular tips and tricks that you'd be like, hey, be sure to do this?
Yeah. I love Thumbtack's recruiting process. I'm very structured, and they have that in place, which is so helpful. And what I love is that you have a dedicated recruiter that will be with you throughout the entire process. So instead of going from just the gatekeeper and then getting passed to the manager or the interview panel, this recruiter will stay with you the entire journey, and just lead you along the way. They'll constantly check in, they'll provide you updates, next steps, which is super helpful. So in that process and that relationship that you're developing with that recruiter, be honest with them. Let them know what you're looking for, what you expect from them in the recruiting process, and don't be afraid to continue to ask questions should you need any clarification. That's what they're there for, and they are excited and open for that dialogue. And I think of the recruiting process that we have in my career, it's probably like the top 5 of the best. And Thumbtack really cares about the candidates. So as you're going through this process, just know we want to make sure that we are building those relationships with each interviewee, getting to know you. And really, it might seem like you're meeting with round 1, round 2, round 3, but we do such a thorough vetting and deliberation job behind the scenes to move you along as quickly as possible. We don't have a very long recruiting life cycle, or we try not to. And so just know that as you go through this process, like, we are all champions for that next, like, moving the right person to that next level as quickly as possible. Because I know it can feel a little bit like you're in the dark sometimes with other recruiting processes.
Sure.
You don't know where you stand, or it kind of goes quiet for a time being. And that kind of goes back to, like, continue to reach out, continue to ask those questions, and know that, like, we do have the best intent for moving this along.
Yeah, there's definitely some I can't even say it, vulnerability with,
Yeah.
a candidate having that trust in their recruiter and bringing that to the table. It is a little bit like dating, right? Like, you're on both sides. You're kind of both trying to decide, like, candidate, is this employment going to be right for me? Employer, is this candidate going to be right? And, like, the more that you can be open and transparent, the better outcome you're going to get, right? Because you both need to kind of weed out and see, is this right for both parties? And sometimes the candidate doesn't do that enough, or maybe the employer sometimes doesn't do that enough to be able to make that perfect match, to make it successful, right? There's things that the candidate might say that's like, oh, okay, you know what, candidate, actually, you need something very different than what we're going to be able to offer, and we could continue this conversation, and potentially you could get hired into this role, but I guarantee you're probably not going to be happy in it for these reasons that you stated. Or it's like, oh, I didn't really realize that about you, candidate. Like, that's really good. We actually need more of that here in our company. And had they not disclosed some of those things, they wouldn't know. So it's this kind of fine dance between employer and candidate, and finding that trust and that common ground to help make both parties really successful.
Absolutely. I love that you said the dating analogy, because I use that all the time as well. I'm like, you are ultimately the driver in selecting your next job. And so if this is not a right fit to you, like, you don't have to accept the third date or the fourth date. And
Yes.
it goes back to, like, what we first talked about, is assessing yourself and what is it that you are looking for.
Yes.
That is key.
Yeah, you got to kind of know, you got to know yourself. You got to know what you want and what you don't want. Know who you are and know who you're not. Because you go into these conversations, if you know who you are coming into these conversations, you're going to be really good at sharing examples and sharing stories and sharing things that you've done, and data around that to help you be successful if you know who you are. If you don't, like, you're going to waffle, and then you're not going to come off confident to the employer. And so it's important that you, kind of going back to what you said at the very beginning around one of your values at Thumbtack, which is to own it. Like, you've got to own it. Because you'll be much more successful coming into it if you own it and you know who you are versus not.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So Thumbtack hires for all sorts of jobs, I'd imagine. Are there any jobs in particular that you guys are looking at right now, or any jobs that you would want to highlight to potential job seekers, or maybe what even next year might look like for you in terms of hiring opportunities that people could take a look at?
Absolutely. So currently and right now, we have a heavy focus in marketing. Really exciting time for Thumbtack. So we have technical SEO managers, so search engine optimize and managers. A few roles there, which are really exciting. Really large growth in data science. So data scientists for product, for trust and safety, for business analytics, and then several roles within our engineering and applied science teams. Right. So those are open right now. And if that applies to anyone's interest and what they are looking for, absolutely go onto our website. You can apply for that. We're in the final stages, like 11th hour, so close to getting final approvals for 2024 budgets. So as of right now, really can't speak to what is coming ahead for 2024, but absolutely take a look at the roles that we have open right now. And then just bookmark that careers page for any future searches that you might want to do.
Yeah, I love that, Kristy. That's cool. Thumbtack would be a really cool company to be a part of. Culturally, just the product, like, everything about it would be a really fun opportunity. So maybe, Kristy, just to kind of wrap up a little bit here, a couple questions for you, and if you've got questions for me as well, we can definitely chat about those. But you've been really successful in your career. You've done a lot of different things, to get to where you're at today. And you work hard, you've got grit, you're really smart, really capable. So can you share with us and job seekers just some of the secrets that you've utilized to help you navigate the job seeking process throughout your career?
Absolutely. It's definitely a journey. And I think as you start young, it shifts and changes as you get older. One of the things that I've really found value in is networking. And really, just as a human being, and we all are, we love connections. We love building relationships with people. Sometimes networking can sound scary. In my mind, it was, back in the day where you'd go to networking events and conferences and you'd pass out your business cards. And it just seemed so unintentional for my personality and style. But a lot of the networking comes from relationships that you have with previous leaders, with peers, and
Yes.
really getting them to know you, your character, your working styles. A really good example is I was connected with a recruiter a few jobs back, and that recruiter followed me from one company that I worked with to the next, trying to get me and pull
Yeah.
me in. And I was like, the timing's not right now, but thank you so much. And it just so happened that when I was available to apply for a position at Thumbtack, that recruiter was recruiting for Thumbtack. And
Oh,
so
how
like the
funny.
stars aligned, the
Yes.
connection was there. And we just had that relationship and that rapport to know, like, what am I looking for as a job seeker? And will this be a good fit for me? And we already had that relationship to do so. So relationships you build will carry you forward. And I think that's really important. And then another key thing that's always resonated very strongly with me is how I obtain and carry through my professional integrity. So whatever is going on, am I feeling confident and successful in the work that I'm doing, the support that I'm providing for my leaders, my organizations, because that really resonates to you feeling successful
Mm.
and confident. So professional integrity equals confidence. And that will speak to any examples that you share when you're talking to somebody, whether it's an elevator pitch, whether you're telling them, what do you do? Who do you work for? Or you're providing those examples in the interview process. It really just helps you just be able to know, like, I know what I can do, and I can do things very well.
Yeah. I love those two things. So professional integrity and relationships, and they kind of go hand in hand. And
Yeah.
as you were kind of sharing those things, I was thinking about, people that are in their jobs today, what kind of experience are they creating for themselves, for the people around them, for their leaders? Like, it really matters. Like, I think a lot of people are in jobs that they hate. At the end of the day, like, you ask, I don't know, maybe the majority of people are like, hey, do you like your job? No, not really, but it pays the bills.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if you have kind of a mentality that you hate your job, you don't do your job very well, you don't take it very seriously, it's like, I just want to move on to the next thing, that can create a really bad outcome for you down the road, because you
Yeah.
never know who you're going to come in contact with, and they're like, oh yeah, I worked with Jeremy back in the day, and gosh, he hated his job. Like, he hated doing what he was doing, and he didn't do it very good, he didn't treat people very good. you
Yeah.
know that that's a very real thing. And these relationships that you talked about are what are going to help you, get these doors open for you down the road that otherwise wouldn't be without those relationships. So I think no matter what job you're in, it's like, how do I do this to the best of my ability?
Yep.
How do I treat those around me in such a way that they know that I respect them, that I can help them, that I'm willing to step in and do whatever. And then you build this amazing reputation so that no matter where you go, people are going to be like, oh yeah, Kristy Christensen, you should consider her for this role. She's so amazing. She did X, Y, and Z. Oh, and by the way, do you know how she treated her employees? she treated them like this. Oh, do you know how she treated her peers or other people within the organization? And then you just build this massive reputation, and it just opens doors. You just never know. You never know kind of who you're going to run into, what's going to happen. And it's super important how you treat people.
Absolutely. It's really the impact of those that you interact with. And to your point, like, how will they come back and say, this is who she is? And, but it's also like internally, how is it impacting you? Do you want to go through every day like it's Groundhog's Day?
Yes.
Just the same thing over and over again? Or do you want to go through and at the end of the day be like, oh, I love my job. I love what I do. And this is why I do it. That's the feeling that I want to feel at the end of the day, at the end of the week, or even looking back a year or two to be like, you know what, like I loved what I did. And here's
Yes.
where I want to learn and develop more. So again, like really having the opportunity to identify what keeps you moving forward as a person in your personal life, but also as a professional in your career.
Yeah, these words of wisdom are awesome, Kristy. Super, super helpful.
Thank you.
What else? Anything else you want to chat about before we wrap up? Anything that's on your mind?
Yeah. So as a business partner looking at, as a member of the people team, so many other organizations and interactions that we have, and looking at data and hiring and retention and attrition, it really kind of like gets my mind going a little bit on like, okay, what did the last 3 years look like? We were completely different HR than we were pre-COVID.
Yes.
And if we look into 2023, okay, what has happened this past year? We're about a year now from, companies having layoffs, large or small tech industries. And so I would love to know from your perspective, like and with like the macroeconomics that are going on, what are you seeing in terms of opportunities for job seekers in 2024?
Yeah, I'm super excited about 2024, to be honest. So, with what my business does right now, we work with employers to help augment their recruiting teams and provide more recruiting support to help hire. So, if companies aren't hiring, they don't necessarily need our support. And so, we hope that the companies want to hire and hire and hire, and need to utilize our services. And so I spend probably 80% of my day, 90% of my day talking to different companies and employers and HR leaders around what does hiring look like in Q4 right now and into 2024. What does that look like? And what I'm seeing is actually really optimistic. It
Mhm.
feels like companies right now typically, and it's a very typical cycle throughout the year where in Q4 companies start their budgeting processes to look and see, here's what 2024 will look like, here's what headcount we're going to have, here's how many net new positions we're going to have, how many backfills likely we're going to have, what does our attrition look like, all these different metrics, so that they can plan out a hiring plan for 2024. And a lot of the companies that we're working with and talking with are very optimistic about what in the next year looks like. I'm hearing a lot about net new positions, whereas 2023 has been mostly, hey, let's backfill people that leave, but we're not adding a lot of net new stuff coming in. And this is actually in all different sectors, whether it's life sciences or biotech or fintech or retail or you name it. It's kind of all across the board of what we're seeing. So I think optimistically, I think 2024 is going to be a great year where things start to progress and get better. There's always going to be curveballs that are thrown. 2024 is an election year. That can throw a lot of curveballs. A lot of different things can happen related to that. We have a lot of issues with wars going on right now, and the challenges that exist in that area. But look, I think what I'd also say is you can only do what's in your control as well. There's a lot of noise that happens in the periphery, and you've got to be able to say, like, what am I in control of as a job seeker? What am I in control of? What skills do I have? What value can I add? You talked about that earlier, right? Like, how do I bring my value to the table and come in and, and be able to make it happen in the things that you can control. So yeah, I'm excited and optimistic about this next year. I think we're going to start to see more jobs happen for more people, and hopefully big, great opportunities come about.
I love that. It sparks this like, ooh, things are going to get exciting, and it opens up a little bit more of like our perception to what has been taking place previously.
Yeah.
There's a positive outlook that we can start to look forward to. That kind of brings me to another question, as we've seen the great resignation and then the quiet quitting, and now individuals with macroeconomic conditions are very hesitant to move jobs or to change. And so they just stay. And so I think with this exciting opportunity or projection for 2024, in respect to anything could change, but how would you recommend somebody who maybe has just stayed silently working because they're comfortable? How do they break that mold? How do they change that perspective of outlook to get their, boots back on and to find the motivation to be like, okay, like gain that confidence again to start evaluating what do they want coming up next when things start to open up?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Kristy. I think you don't want to be numb, right? I don't want to be numb. I want to lead a life that is purposeful, that is intentional, that I'm in the driver's seat driving versus having things done to me. I can remember a lot throughout my career and having leaders say, Jeremy, you need to have a strategy. You need to be in front of this, because if you don't, people are going to be pulling your strings, and you're going to have to drive their strategy versus yours. And so I think it kind of applies to the same thing with being in a role that maybe you're just kind of on autopilot, just kind of going through the motions. And I think for anybody that's in that situation right now, they should take a page out of your book around assessing, doing that self-assessment and saying, all right, where am I at today? Am I on autopilot? Am I like heading towards a mountain that I'm going to crash into? Am I like descending? Or am I on the upward swing? And if I'm not, like, what do I need to do to get there? And what does that look like for me? And a lot of it will be what's you hear it all the time right now. It's all about skills. What skills do you have? What skills are you gaining? What are the most important skills that are coming up in the market? What are the skills that are needed? I think anybody that wants to progress their career, they need to see what skills are needed for the future. Whether that's tech skills, whether that's other hard skills, whatever that might be that you're interested in, so that you can prepare yourself to be able to show the value that you have. I think when you end up having more confidence in the value that you bring, you're not as worried if you were to take a jump to another company. And I remember I spent about 14 years at eBay, and I thought I was going to, work there forever and die there, right? Like it was a long time. And I was actually kind of nervous to make the jump to move from one company to another. But after I made that jump, it was actually really empowering to realize, oh, you know what, my skills, my capabilities, what I bring to the table at this other company is actually really good, and they really value what I bring to the table, and I can help them in a different way. So I think not being scared to maybe make that jump, you have to be smart about it, right? You have to look at all the different variables to say, how viable is this company? What are the opportunities for growth? What will that look like? And on the flip side, I remember maybe just like a couple years into working at eBay, there was a job that probably paid more than I was making at the time. But and that's always kind of convenient to be like, oh, well, I can go and work this job and get paid more. But then you looked at it, it's like, well, where would you go from this job? There's like no upward mobility. There's not much, there's not a lot of opportunity. So I go in this job, I might make a little bit more money, but there's nowhere to go.
Mhm.
And I'm glad I didn't take that job and I stayed at eBay, because every year there was a new opportunity to do something different and grow. So I think you just have to kind of understand, and look at all the different variables and say, all right, is this going to help me grow and help me to that next step, and build that plan. And you build that plan that you need, then you can be really successful.
I love that. I love it. So like constantly maintaining the flame of passion
Yes.
and excitement in your life. Don't become numb. Always be learning and growing and developing. Even if you decide I'm going to stay at this job for a while until things start opening up more. I'm just a little scared. Continue to learn, continue to
Yes.
develop, continue to grow in any form of aspect. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're not learning, you're not growing. And it can be a lot of things, like find things that you're passionate about. I drive my wife crazy because I want to try this and I want to try that and I want to try this other thing. Like I just like to try different things and learn different things. And whether it's, I'm really into two-sided marketplaces like Airbnb and Verbo, or Turo, or Thumbtack, right? There are all these different kind of two-sided marketplaces. In fact, that's what we created our business off of, is these different two-sided businesses where we bring recruiters and companies together. And it's just fun and exciting because they are things that work. But you learn a lot along the way, and it's just a lot of fun. So make sure you're learning. I think that is the name of the game.
Always.
I know. I was gonna, Kristy and I, before this podcast, we met earlier just to catch up and see how things were going. And I was just admiring all of your books back here. There's a lot. What's the next book that you want to read, or something that you're passionate about learning?
I have a stack of HR books that I'm excited to get to during the winter break that Thumbtack provides. I always tell my husband, like, gosh, can we just go back to the day where we don't have technology and we don't have social media and we just sit and read? And
Yeah.
so I'm really looking forward to that, and still diving into more aspects of HR, leadership development, how I can continue to improve upon like my knowledge and my skills that will impact the leaders that I support, because really their success is my success.
Oh, that's awesome. Kristy, you're awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us. It's fun to learn more about Thumbtack too, and the different opportunities that are there. I think anybody that is looking for a really meaningful career, they should take a look at the career site and check that out. Connect with you on LinkedIn to be able to expand your relationships and your network that way. But thanks so much for coming on to the show. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy, for the opportunity. This was fun and love these conversations. So would welcome them in anytime.
Awesome. Let's help some job seekers find some jobs.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Kristy.